Okay, welcome back, everyone. We're going to talk about this next fetter of conceit. This is part of the ego, and this is where you're learning how to cultivate humbleness and dissolve the ego. About 2 Sundays ago, I taught about the ego in the group learning program, but what I'm going to share with you here is a deeper level of understanding of this to get deeper into it. Where in the group learning program, we're teaching to a certain level of detail and then going deeper as students ask. But here, I'm going to go quite a bit deeper. So for some of you guys, you might have seen some of these things, but for others, this will be all brand new for you. So let's first talk about what conceit is, because it's conceit and the fetter of personal existence view of what we refer to as the ego. During the lifetime of the Buddha, the word ego didn't exist. That it wasn't until much later that this word was created. But it's helpful to understand the ego in 2 separate fetters because there's different symptoms and there's different solutions for it. So what we refer to as the ego is personal existence view and conceit, but you're going to need to know these as 2 separate fetters. When people typically think about the ego, they typically are thinking about this particular fetter. They're not usually thinking about personal existence view, but that is part of the ego. So what conceit is arrogance or pride. This is the mind judging others to try to determine what is wholesome or unwholesome for others. This is the measuring and comparing as one being superior or inferior to others. This is what conceit is. And just here up front, because sometimes people have trouble to understand the difference between judgment and discernment, I would like to be sure that you guys understand this, because when you're diving into understanding conceit, it's helpful to understand what we're referring to when we talk about judgment versus discernment. Because sometimes people think judgment is just making a decision, but that's not what judgment is in this context. What judgment is attempting to determine what is right or wrong for another person while placing oneself above or below others with arrogance and pride, comparing that one is superior, inferior to others, attempting to declare who is wholesome or unwholesome, good or bad. Judgment's based in conceit, and this needs to be eradicated from the mind in order to experience enlightenment. What discernment is, this is just wise decision-making based in wisdom, and this is what you would need to cultivate in order to get to enlightenment. So when you decide to cross the street, that's not judgment. That's discernment, that you're looking both ways, you're looking at the cars, you're trying to decide, would it be wise for me to cross now? This is discernment. But that person who's driving the car, if it's got a paint job that isn't so nice and you're like, look at his car, look at her car, my car's better. This is the judgment where you're now looking down on that person. Or maybe you're looking up to that person. Oh my goodness, look at that beautiful car they have. It's so much nicer than mine. I'm just such a worthless person, right? This is the judgment where the mind's putting yourself above or below people. And this is just as dangerous, putting yourself above people and talking down to them. Putting yourself below people is just as dangerous, because when you're around people, your mind's going to be all shaken up. Like say if you're around your boss or a celebrity or a politician, you might be all shaken up around that person. Your mind's uncalm and unsteady. And it's because of this conceit. Because in some cases, if you're putting yourself above people, that means in other cases, you're going to be putting yourself below people. And where this is coming from is those animal existences that prior to the human realm, many of us have been reborn countless times in the animal realm. And in the animal realm, we needed conceit. We needed to know who's above us and who's below us. If we didn't have that in the animal realm, we wouldn't have survived, right? When we were a pack of wolves, we needed to know who's the alpha male and who's the alpha female. They're teaching us how to hunt. They're teaching us how to survive. Who's the matriarch of our elephant herd? She's teaching us where to eat, where the food is. She's teaching us the watering holes. She's teaching us the migration paths. If we didn't know who the matriarch of our elephant herd was, we would die. We wouldn't know, right? So in the animal realm, we have this pecking order that we look for, and that's there for survival. But when we come into the human realm, our consciousness retains this, right? That our consciousness takes on this conditioning from our previous existences. So therefore, in the human realm, there's this conceit that gets acquired more and more and more. And now we don't need that in the human realm. In the human realm, when we have conceit or this arrogance or pride, we're putting ourselves above or below people, people will push you aside. They're not interested in being around that, right? So ultimately, you need to eliminate this conceit. But let's talk more about the symptoms of this and what you'll experience as a result. But let's just talk a little bit more about what the ego is. because now I'm going to start using this word ego a bit, and it's helpful to know more about what the ego is. The ego is this collection of experiences from the past or the future, expectations that you have of yourself. This is accumulation of thoughts, ideas, your perceptions of your self-image and your self-identity. That's the part that is the personal existence view. The part that is the conceit is the arrogance, the pride, the judgment, the measuring and comparing as superior, inferior. Like I mentioned, that word ego didn't exist during the lifetime of the Buddha. So he talks about what we refer to as the ego in these two separate ways. And it's actually very helpful to be able to understand it in these two ways, because there's different symptoms and there's different remedies, and you're going to need to be able to identify and distinguish the two. So we've already talked about personal existence view in this retreat, and now we're going to start talking about conceit. So here are some of the difficulties with this ego, that it stands in the way of you seeing true reality, that there's certain unwholesome qualities that are in one's own mind when they have ego, and they tend to project those onto other people, and then they read those reflection coming back to them as coming from the other person, when in reality it's coming from your own mind. So say you're in a business meeting and somebody walks in wearing a really nice set of clothes, their hair is looking perfect, their skin complexion's looking great, and you see them walk in and you're like, look at her trying to look so beautiful, or look at him trying to be so handsome. Nope, that's not what's occurring. That's in your own mind. Your own mind wants to be so beautiful. Your own mind wants to be so handsome. All that's just happened is somebody just walked into the room. That's all that's happened. But your mind, having this ego, wanting to put yourself above or below people, you're now perceiving it as this person wants what you want. What you want is to be perceived by others to be so beautiful or handsome. And now when somebody walks in looking beautiful or looking handsome, your mind's perceiving it that they're trying to do what you want. When in reality, they just might have woke up, put some clothes on, shifted their hair around, and boom, they just walked into the room. But now you're adding story into it. Your perception is that this person wants to be beautiful or handsome, when in reality it's coming from your own mind. So those unwholesome qualities are being projected onto this other person, and now it's being read as coming from them, when in reality it's coming from your own mind. It's kind of like looking out at the world through a dirty window, that there's this dirty window in the mind, this pollution of conceit, and you're looking out at the world through that conceit, and now you're reading it as it's coming from other people, when in reality it's coming from one's own mind. And this is where one might have judgment towards others, and this is where they might cling to a certain perception. What a perception is a view or opinion that may or may not even be true, that the mind clings to this. And now you make unwise decisions in that business meeting if you're clinging to the perception that this person wants to be so beautiful, this person wants to be so handsome. They speak up in the business meeting, and now you're unskillful in your speech towards this person. Maybe you're disgruntled or bitter towards them, and now your boss and your coworkers see that, and now you're damaging your relationships, all because of what's going on within your own mind. When in reality, you can just see everybody is equal, and okay, maybe this man is handsome, or maybe this woman is beautiful, but you don't have to compare yourself to that person and trying to put yourself above or below them. Just everybody looks different. So not only does the mind project its unwholesome qualities onto other people, but you can project your wholesome qualities too. Let's just say you decide to go vegan, and you think that, wow, this is the best thing in the world. Everybody in the world should be vegan. And now you identify with that as part of your identity, that this is part of your personal existence view of I am vegan. And now the mind is arrogant and prideful around this. And now when you're out in the world, you have this wholesome quality that you're projecting onto everybody else. And now you have this expectation and this want of everybody to do this wholesome thing that you're doing. And now you're maybe angry or frustrated or agitated that other people aren't doing what you're doing, right? And this is the mind's craving for permanence, and it's coming from the ego. Wow, look at me. I'm doing all these wholesome things. I'm a Buddhist practitioner. I'm practicing right speech, and these other people aren't. And wow, I meditate every day. Look at me. Look at how great I am. And all these other people should do that too. Why don't they do it? Right? And now you might go into a setting and try to be boastful about, look at all of these things that I'm doing. I meditate for this amount of time, or I go to these retreats, and I choose to eat vegan, and I'm choosing to do this. Look how wholesome I am. Why isn't everyone else this way? And this is the ego that's doing that. The mind's expecting other people to be the same as you. So ultimately what you come to the conclusion of is that the ego serves no purpose. It's just standing in your way of having harmonious relationships and be able to see true reality of seeing people as they truly are. Instead, the mind is just going to keep being arrogant and prideful, judging other people, casting these unwholesome qualities on others, casting these wholesome qualities and trying to expect other people to do things your same way. And now it hinders you from just being able to have loving relationships and realizing that everybody's in a different place in their journey in life. And not everyone's going to be at the same place as you. And you don't need to compare where you are to them. That just they're on their journey, you are on your journey, and that's all that needs to happen. Okay? So here are some of the symptoms of conceit, that you'll experience this discontentedness associated with your position in society, authority, or status. Say you feel like you have a certain position in society, some authority or some status, and now let's just say you get a demotion at work or you lose that job. Your ego will struggle with that. Or say you have a certain status and now somebody gets promoted above you, right? Maybe it's one of your coworkers that you used to work with in the past, and maybe in the company, they're at a lower position in the company, but now maybe they get promoted above you. And now you're going to have a real trouble with that in this situation, and you're going to experience discontentedness. You might notice that you have shyness, because if you're putting yourself below people, you might feel shy, but you can also have overconfidence. That's putting yourself above people, where you can be overly confident. You can be lacking or overly confident in certain public settings. There might be social anxiety when you go out to a large crowd, or if you go to a party or a social event, or even coming to the temple like this. If you have conceit, you might notice that you have anxiety in these situations. Anger, frustration, irritation, agitation, annoyance, all based on superiority or inferiority, where the mind is putting itself above people or below people. And you might notice jealousy of other people's accomplishments, that where people are accomplishing certain things, you're measuring and comparing yourself to that, and now you feel jealous. If someone has a better house than you, better clothes than you, more money than you, a nicer car than you, maybe they go on more vacations than you. If you're comparing what they're doing versus what you're doing, you'll feel jealous in these situations because your mind's measuring and comparing, and you're wanting to potentially be above them. Or you feel like you're so far below them, and now you feel miserable that your life isn't the same as their life, where in reality, this is just impermanence. Not everybody's going to go on the same number of holidays. Not everyone's going to have the same car, the same house, or things like this. Essentially, what the mind's doing with this conceit, one of the symptoms is that it's looking for this pecking order, attempting to figure out who's above you and below you. If you're noticing that your mind's doing that when you go into a social situation, this is the mind's ego. Sometimes if you go to a party, one of the first things is like, hi, how are you? What's your name? Well, what do you do? Right away. What is your job? Right? Because now there's this pecking order. We got to figure out who's the doctors, who's the lawyers, who's the politicians, who's the famous people, and who's just the menial people that, we can sit in the back corner and we don't mean anything to anybody, right? This isn't what you're interested in. So if your mind's doing that when you go into a social setting, that's where you're trying to figure out the pecking order. And that's not what you're interested in, because it's going to just lead to problematic results in your relationships. The mind will want to communicate or project its position, its status, its authority, any kind of wholesome traits. This is where, like, when you go to that party, you want to tell other people what you're doing, or you want to put on your Facebook page all the amazing things that you've done. Look at me. Look at all the great things that I'm doing. Let me take a picture of this degree or this certificate that I've just created and I just earned, and let me put it on Facebook so everybody can admire me for what I'm doing. Right? So this is where the mind's going to want to go out there and tell everybody, look at all the great things that I'm doing. Aren't you so proud of me? Don't you want to admire me? This is the boastfulness that the mind has. And the mind will want other people to acknowledge, affirm, or be distinguished for your accomplishments. When you're making those accomplishments, you'll want other people to affirm them, right? Like, hey, guess what? I just went to this 30-day retreat. Aren't you so proud of me? Like, you'll just kind of figure out a way to work that into the conversation. You might be talking about something completely different, but you just want to work in this fact that I went to this yoga retreat, or I went to this teacher training thing, and it has nothing to do with the conversation at all. but you're just kind of working that into the conversation so people can know about what you did. Like, look at me, I'm so wholesome. But what you would like to do is do these things for yourself, for your own benefit in your own mind. You don't need to communicate to other people what it is that you're doing. You might notice that you're being repeatedly pushed away by others due to your arrogance or your inability to have peaceful relationships with others where all beings are equal. Because where you have ego and you go in and you're kind of working into the conversation over and over and over again about, look how great I am, over time, people are going to discover that and they're just going to push you aside. The first 1 or 2 times that you do this, okay, people might just smile and might just listen to what you have to say. But over time, you might notice that you become very lonely because people aren't interested in being around you, and you just spend time alone because people kind of push you aside and they're not interested in being around the ego. So if you're noticing that you're being pushed away, you would like to look at this in your own arrogance that might be coming into your relationships. You might notice that you have this negative inner dialogue that is degrading and diminishing, because if you're judging others, you're going to be judging yourself too. And you're going to have this negative dialogue where you're diminishing and degrading yourself within your own mind. You might notice that you have jokes that are diminishing and degrading other people, or diminishing and degrading yourself. I think they even have a word for this. They call it self-deprecating humor, right? This is very unwise to go around and degrade other people or degrade yourself. Even though there is no self here, it would be very unwise to go around and just talk negatively about this being to others, or even to have those thoughts within your own mind, because it's just going to diminish your ability to be successful in the world. So if you're noticing that you're joking and diminishing and degrading others or yourself, that's part of the conceit. You might notice that you have gossip or slander, where you're communicating in ways that's damaging someone else's reputation, either an individual, a company, an organization, a country, or a group of people, whether it's true or false. Even if you're talking about things that are true, that you've discovered something true that is going to shine a negative light on this person or this organization, there's no need to do that. That's the ego that's wanting to do that. It's wanting to diminish others in order to make yourself look better. That's what the ego is doing. The mind thinks that if I put out this person's candle, then my candle will shine brighter. But in reality, the room is just going to get darker because there's less candles in the room. So you're not interested in putting out other people's candles. You might notice that there's pridefulness or boastfulness or showing off, especially to those who you think are below you, thinking or also thinking that certain tasks are below you. So if you notice this pridefulness or this showing off, look at my life and look how great my life is. Don't you want to see how great my life is? I'm so wonderful. I'm so great. You might see this about your mind at different times. And of course, I'm talking about it in the extremes so that you guys can see it. But there's lesser versions of this too, where your mind's just trying to slip in this little thing here or there, right? Or there might be certain tasks that you feel are below you. Like sometimes you might think that washing dishes or mopping the floor or picking up a piece of trash or cleaning a toilet or something like this, you might think that that's below you. This is a symptom of the conceit. You might notice that you're either talking down to people or you're talking up to people with such admiration and such in all of other people, where you're lacking the ability to be comfortable around all people. The mind is uncalm around certain people that you'll think that are above you, like your boss, or maybe a teacher that you admire, or maybe a politician or a celebrity or something like this, that your mind's going to be uncalm in those situations. You might notice that you're disrespectful towards others, thinking that others are stupid or idiots or less individuals, wanting others to treat you with respect in certain ways, right? So if you're thinking of others in degrading and diminishing ways, if you're being disrespectful through your speech or your actions towards people, this is all coming from the conceit. And you might actually have this expectation in your mind that people will treat you a certain way. Like, who are you to treat me this way? Right? Like, who are you? Right? This is the mind thinking, well, I'm above this. You're treating me in a certain way, and I deserve to be respected. This is the mind's conceit. Well, yeah, it's wise for you to respect other people, but you don't deserve respect. This is the man demanding it. The man's expecting it. Instead, just understand that it's wise for you to respect others, but not everyone's going to respect you. That would be permanence, right? So if you have this expectation that other people will respect you, this is the mind's ego that's wanting wanting that. Constantly wanting to prove oneself or your ability and give information to others as unsolicited advice or guidance, right? This is where you might come to somebody and you might teach them about the teachings of the Buddha when they didn't even ask you about it. They didn't even ask a question, but you're just showing up in their life and saying, hey, you should do it this way, or you should do it that way. As you become more and more awake, you're going to have lots and lots of wisdom. And if you went around starting to teach people in an unsolicited way, you wouldn't be able to get through your day. When you walk down the street, you're going to see all kinds of unwise things happening. When you go to a restaurant, you're going to see all kinds of unwise things happening. When you spend time with your family at family events, you're going to see all kinds of unwise things happening. If you just started telling people in an unsolicited way all the things that they are doing wrong and they need to change and do it the right way, this is your ego, and people are going to push you away. They're going to be like, we don't want that person here anymore walking around. So you're going to need to be able to remain humble and restrain your mind. Even though you see people doing things unwise, remember that's affecting them. If you don't have a craving, a desire, attachment for other people to do things a certain way, and if you get rid of your ego, you can understand like, hey, their unwise decisions are affecting them. And if they're doing something really unwise and it is potentially able to affect you, that's where you just choose to politely get up and walk away and you leave, right? That's your choice. But you don't need to tell everybody that, hey, you're doing this wrong and that's why I'm leaving, because you guys are not doing this right. That's the unsolicited guidance. That's the arrogance and the pride. Thinking that you're right and everyone else is wrong. This is part of the ego, or a willingness to argue to prove a point. If you have a certain thing that your mind is clinging to, like a certain perception, and you've got ego around that, you might argue with people and adamantly trying to convince them that you're right and they're wrong. This is something that I'm sure we've all experienced in different times based on the ego being there. You might notice that you're pushy or forceful. You might be pressuring others to do things a certain way or your way. This is putting your expectations on others. It's because the mind thinks, I'm right, others are wrong. If they don't do it my way, it's the wrong way, and it's got to be done my way. This is the ego, the arrogance. You might notice that you're closed-minded, thinking that you already know everything, unwilling to seek help and guidance from others. This is the really detrimental and self-sabotaging aspect of the ego, that the ego thinks I'm so right and everyone else is so wrong. You need help for that ego. You need help to dissolve that and have somebody help you to understand what that ego is and that that's detrimental to you. But as long as that ego is in place, a lot of times the mind doesn't get help. So if the ego is high enough, it won't get the help that it needs. Where if you lower the ego a bit, you'll be able to come in and sit in a place like this and be able to get help to understand what the ego is. But there's a lot of people out there that will never get that help because the ego is so high, it thinks that everybody else is the problem, and they're never going to get the help that they need to realize that the ego is a problem and that they need to dissolve it. So this mind that is closed-minded and already thinking that they know everything, this is the self-sabotaging aspect of the mind, that it won't get the help that it actually needs because it thinks that everyone else is the problem. You might notice that the mind blames others for what you experience in life. This is part of the conceit, part of the ego. Okay? So any questions on what the ego is, what this conceit is, before we go into talking about the solutions? I'd like to be sure you guys understand it because it's a pretty complex thing to think about, and maybe you haven't thought about it before. Maybe you just need to be sure that you understand what it is. So is there anybody who needs help with that? Yeah, Steve.
So you mentioned the ego serves no purpose. Mm-hmm. But every being that takes human form will have an ego. Is that correct?
Every being that is in the unenlightened state will have some degree of ego. But by the time you get to enlightenment, the ego is not there any longer. Yes. It's been fully dissolved and eliminated.
Yeah. So I'm not trying to challenge the view, but in a way, isn't that the purpose of it? You know, the purpose is that it's a challenge to dissolve it in a way.
There's a purpose for it in the animal realm, But here in the human realm, there's no purpose for it. We don't need it. That's why we can eliminate it. If there was a purpose for it and it served a beneficial purpose, then we would need it in order to survive. And this is something you'll hear some people say. They'll say that you can't survive without an ego. And that's just because they're either not understanding what the ego is, they haven't taken time to understand it, they haven't been around somebody that has dissolved their ego to realize that you don't need ego in order to survive. So if there was some kind of beneficial purpose, then you wouldn't be able to survive without it. But you can, in fact, you'll enjoy life much more without an ego, because that ego is constantly in there. Your mind can almost become obsessive when you're in a social situation, constantly trying to figure out, or in a work situation, like a professional environment where your mind's constantly trying to figure out this pecking order. And now if a new person comes into the group, now the mind's got to reshuffle that and figure that out. And it becomes very exhausting to the mind to carry around this ego. So that's why I say there is no purpose for it. In the animal realm, there is a purpose. You wouldn't be able to survive without it. And that's why the mind holds on to it so tightly. But from here in the human realm, we can dissolve it and get rid of it because it doesn't serve a purpose. You're welcome. You have a question?
Thank you, David. For confidence, like I'm kind of still thinking, maybe you can help me with the confidence, like overconfidence versus confidence. I mean, there's confidence in the teachings, confidence in something maybe I experienced. Then overconfidence, I guess it could be if I start judging others, that's one sign it's overconfidence. But how else can I distinguish between overconfidence and confidence that may be wholesome?
Yeah, if you're confident in something, you won't have an urge to argue and convince other people of it, because you're confident that you know the truth, and your understanding of the truth doesn't have a craving behind it. Whereas if you're overconfident and you've got a craving, you're going to want to go out there and prove to other people that what you know is the truth. And that's the ego, the arrogance. But if you are confident in what it is that you know, and you know that this is the truth and this is the wisdom, you can just walk down the street with a smile. And if somebody asks you a question, sure, I'll share it with you. But if somebody's not interested, no need to share it. You're just completely comfortable and content, confident, knowing that you know the truth, and you don't have this urge to convince other people of it.
Thank you.
Yep.
As we move through life, making new friends, wanting people to like us, is that just all ego?
Wanting other people to like you. This is partially the the personal existence view. There's some little bit of sensual desire in there, and even conceit. So whenever there's any one bout of discontentedness, it's very rarely just one fetter involved. And this is why it's so hard to decipher all of this and be able to eliminate it from the mind, because the mind can't see clearly this is personal existence view, this is sensual desire, this is conceit. And that's what you're building by learning in a retreat like this, that you're building your awareness of these different symptoms. And you're also understanding to be able to identify these with your mindfulness. That's the mindfulness of the four foundations of mindfulness, that mental objects. That in that situation where somebody's wanting others to like them, yes, it does involve conceit and involves the ego. It's personal existence view, wanting to be perceived in the world a certain way, certain self-image, certain self-identity. It has this conceit, this arrogance and pride, this measuring and comparing. You can probably see those two pretty easily. But then there's also the sensual desire, where the mind wants to hear favorable things and agreeable things. You want to hear that through the ears. And when you hear this disagreeable thing where someone says, I don't like you, now there's some sensual desire there, that the mind has heard something that is disagreeable. And now it triggers the personal existence view, the conceit, and there's sensual desire in there as well.
So if you're in a situation where you're developing new relationships with people, it's like, how do you approach that without all of those things coming into that and still be like interactive with people and create relationships without all of those fetters coming into being.
Of course, you need to eliminate them through the training that we're talking about, and that's what's going to allow you to be able to do that. But in that situation where you're meeting new people, if you have a craving for others to like you, you will do things and say things based on those cravings. And now that longing, yearning will actually backfire on you because you're going to do things that are unwise, and now it's going to produce unwholesome results. Whereas if you're confident, like we were talking about, you're just confident that, hey, I'm making wise decisions here, and I'm just going to be whatever I do. I'm just going to say the things that I normally say. I'm just going to be however I be. And whether this person likes me or not, it's not a function of you. It's actually a function of what's going on in their mind. And based on their cravings and their expectations, they're going to either like you or dislike you. And if somebody dislikes you, that's an indication of what's going on in their mind. It's not an indication of what's going on in your mind, right? And the same thing with you. Like if you dislike another being, this is a function of what's going on in your mind. This is your own cravings, your own expectations. So that's why by the time you get to enlightenment, you won't even have the slightest dislike towards another human being, because you will have eliminated all your cravings and all your expectations of other people. And you will realize that everybody is different. This is all impermanence. So you won't expect somebody to be a certain way. So therefore, whatever way they are, you just understand that's the way they are. And you don't see this as agreeable or disagreeable. You just understand this is the way they are. And this is just impermanence, and I don't have an expectation for them to be any one particular way. So by the time you get to enlightenment, you won't have dislike towards others. And then because of that, you'll understand that if someone dislikes you, that's a function of what's going on in their mind. And you would be very unwise to modify your conduct and your behavior based on what this person wants, because that would be your craving, that I want to be this person's friend, or I want this boss to like me, so now I'm going to modify what I do in order to get in with this person. This would be your own cravings and expectations, your own attachments, where instead you need to be able to see this wise way of conducting yourself with your own personality, your own character, but you are practicing the right intention, right speech, right action. And now if somebody says, I don't like that, they are too kind. Have you ever heard this? Yeah. Somebody will say, I don't like that person, they're too kind. Okay, well, I'm sorry, so that doesn't mean you start being angry and impolite in order to get in with that person. Instead, okay, that's that person's cravings and expectations. I'm just going to do what I know, which is wise, which is I'm going to be polite, kind, friendly, and respectful with other people. And if somebody dislikes me for that, then so be it. There's a great thing a great discourse from the Buddha on this, where he shares that people were accusing him, people were slandering and gossiping him, and saying that he teaches the extermination of a being, meaning the individual, because he was teaching to eliminate discontentedness. He was eliminating personal existence view. So people that didn't understand his teachings, they were angry and they were hostile and they were bitter, and they were saying, you're teaching the extermination of a being. And he knows he wasn't teaching that. And what he said was, he says, if people hate me and disparage me and degrade me for teaching what is discontentedness, the cause of it, the elimination of it, and the path forward, then, my mind is unaffected by that. And if somebody praises me and honors me and respects me for teaching the Four Noble Truths and the elimination of discontentedness, my mind's unaffected by that too. But if they do honor and respect me, that's because they understand what I'm teaching. Where if somebody doesn't understand me, then they might have hatred and anger towards me. So you need to be able to have that same mentality, that when you go out into the world and you're being loving and kind and warm and gentle and you're being respectful, of course you're going to be making missteps because you're not enlightened yet. You're not going to be perfect. But if someone hates you and disparages you for that, That's their own craving, their own expectation. And you're probably not interested in being around that person anyway, right? So you just spend time with the people who see this loving, warm, gentle, friendly, generous being that you are. And now the people that hate you for those things, okay, that's on them. That's their own cravings. So you just stay without craving, desire, attachment. Don't want to be this person's friend. Don't try to convince them to be your friend, but instead you just be you, right? Even though there's no you just be you. You just be the person that you're making the decisions to be. And if people love you for that, great. And don't take pleasure in that, but wonderful, they like you. And if somebody doesn't like you and they hate you, okay, that's fine. I'm just going to continue walking forward here, being the loving, kind, polite, respectful person that I'm working on being, right? And understanding that you're going to make missteps. Anything else? Let's see. Let me check here on our platforms. Okay, it looks like we have something coming in here. This is a question. Why are people scared to die? That's the question that they're asking. The reason why people are scared to die is because their mind's craving and clinging to existence, and they're holding on to either the world, or they might be holding on to their relationships, they might be holding on to their material possessions, and now being parted from those things, an individual can be scared or fearful of dying. Another reason why someone can be fearful of dying is they're afraid of the unknown, and they don't know what's next. And this is why by the time you get to enlightenment and you're training your mind in these teachings, you'll know what's next. You will have independently verified the cycle of rebirth, and you know that if your mind is unenlightened, there's going to be rebirth, and that's okay. You've been reborn countless times. If you need 5 more or 10 more, then okay, so be it. This is not what I would encourage, but okay, so be it. You've been reborn already countless times, but not knowing what's next can be very fearful for someone. So if someone's unenlightened, you are going to experience rebirth. And if you are enlightened, by that point, you're not going to care what's next. The Buddha leaves it as an undeclared teachings of what is next or isn't next once an individual gets to enlightenment and dies. So these are some of the reasons why someone might fear death. Okay. Oh, you have a question, Leela? Yep.
I kind of had to write this out like a math problem to make it fit in my brain. So I just wanted to know if I'm looking at this the right way, and it kind of goes with the question you just answered. So rebirth requires conditions of unresolved cravings, desires, and attachments, and it needs a host or a body or 5 aggregates to carry out the next attempt at extinguishing remaining cravings, desires, and attachments. I don't exist because I am simply 5 aggregates plus unresolved cravings, desires, and attachments. This existence will end one of 2 ways. Either my body and mind will die with still having cravings, desires, and attachments and find a new host, or I will reach enlightenment and extinguish the conditions that lead to rebirth.
Yes.
Okay.
You're understanding it. We had a very long conversation this week out in front of a
This took me 2 days
Yeah.
to understand.
Yeah. If you can get that I out of there, though,
Yes.
that'll help you even more.
Okay.
But what you just said is true. That's what's going on.
I have follow-up questions that this idea didn't resolve. Is
Okay.
now a good time for that or not?
Is it related to conceit?
I'm not certain. I don't think so.
Okay, let's talk about it later.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So now that you're understanding more about what the ego is and this conceit and how the ego is comprised of conceit and personal existence view, which we've already talked about, personal existence view and eliminating that. Now we're going to talk about eliminating conceit. And for some of you guys, you were here a couple of Sundays ago when I was teaching these things, and these are the exact same things because the solutions and remedies are the same, right? It's not anything different. So for some of you guys, you might have already seen this. This is in volume 1, chapter 16, where what you're looking to do is humble the mind. So saying thank you, sorry, speaking politely, using sir and ma'am, or the phrase I don't know is really helpful for the ego. The ego is not interested to say I don't know. When somebody asks you a question, you will finagle and finagle and finagle and finagle just to not say those words, I don't know. There was a student a couple of weeks ago that sent me a question by private message, and they said, how do I deal with anxiety? And this is someone who hasn't studied with me very much. And I wrote them back and I said, do you know what causes anxiety? Because I was first interested to make sure they understand what causes it before I taught them how to eliminate it. And boy, they haven't written back because they just don't want to say, I don't know. Because I know this person and I know that there's conceit there, and they just aren't interested in saying, I don't know, right? And now the ego hinders itself, self-sabotages itself from being able to get the help that it actually needs, where if they just would be comfortable with saying, I don't know. Because if someone asks you a question, you can't be an expert in everything, right? That would be permanence. It's just not possible. So where possible, say, I don't know. This is really helpful for your mind. Just say, I don't know. The biggest thing that you can do, there's actually two things. The first one is sleeping in a low position. This is very helpful for the mind. It'll take you all of about 2 to 5 minutes to set this up, and you're going to reap the rewards for a long time to come. Because this ego, this conceit takes a long time to wear away. It's not going to be 1 week or 1 month or 1 year of training. So if you set up a low position for sleeping, and now your mind gets down into bed and up out of bed and down into bed and up out of bed, if you're not familiar with this, it might sound a little bit odd that could affect the ego, but it does. It's very impactful for the mind. And that's why if you're here in Asia, here in Thailand, most of the beds are actually quite low. You would like the bed to be from your knee height or below. If possible, get it even lower. For me, I just put my mattress straight on the floor. There's no frame, there's no box spring, there's no nothing. It's just a mattress on the floor. And it's very comfortable. And you'll just go down and up and out of your bed each individual time you're doing that. This is really helping to wear away the mind and humbling it and bringing it down to earth. So this is like one of the very best things you can do. Sitting on the floor, if you're capable of doing that, like while you're watching TV, while you're reading a book, anything like that, this is really helpful for you. If there's any tasks that you feel like are beneath you, like washing dishes, scrubbing floors, washing toilets, things like this, helpful for you to do those things. Listening to others teach you wisdom without any interest to teach them anything. You guys are doing that right now, right? Sometimes students do try to teach me things. They come to me and they try to teach me things about the teachings of the Buddha. And if you ever find yourself in that situation, that would be really unwise. You would like to humble your mind and put yourself in a position where you're learning and you're not interested to teach other people anything. So this is very helpful for the mind, not just with the teachings of the Buddha, but with other things too in your life. You can do those kinds of things. The second most impactful thing, in addition to sleeping on the floor, is washing people's feet. They do this here in Thailand. They actually have a thing that's called Rot Nam Dam Hua. Or actually, this is for your car. Dam Hua is for an individual, for a person. So like on Mother's Day, Father's Day, on your birthday, on Teacher's Day, on any particular holidays, people might wash the feet of their parents, their teacher, their boss. You might find people doing this with their life partner, where the person will sit in a chair, you'll be down on the floor with a bowl of water, and you kind of ceremoniously wash their feet and dry their feet and take care of them. You know, we can communicate love through our spoken words, but this action of washing people's feet, not only does it help you eliminate your own ego, but it helps to communicate love as you just gracefully touch their person's feet and clean them very nicely. This is something that's really wonderful for the mind and for the ego. Show respect to people through a why. This is kind of universally and internationally becoming known as appreciation and gratitude. I did this when I was in America 2 years ago. I did it when I was in Egypt. I was whying people and they loved it. They thought it was the best thing ever. I wasn't doing it because I was trying to get them to perceive me in a certain way, but I just noticed they absolutely adored it, and they actually were doing it back to me too, because whatever you put out, it's going to come back to you, right? So even here in Thailand, we why people a lot, and this is humbling the mind. You're doing that 15, 20, 30 times a day. there's no reason why you can't do that in other places too. I'm even seeing like celebrities at award shows when they're getting awards for some famous award. There's celebrities that are standing up and doing these kinds of things too. So it's universally becoming recognized now. Even when I'm on my motorbike and I'm driving out of my village or in my village, I've got my hands on my motorbike, I'll bow my head down to the people as a way of showing respect and gratitude. So you can do these kinds of things. Practicing generosity, loving kindness, and compassion in all your relationships. This is really helpful for the mind. Eliminating any judgment or comparisons that you're superior, inferior. So where you're noticing that's coming up, you're walking down the street and you're judging people, you need to be able to kick that to the side, apply right effort to eliminate that. Be kind and gentle because it's the right thing to do, not because you want anything from this person or you're trying to appear humble, right? The ego is really tricky. Sometimes the ego wants to appear humble because the ego has this arrogance and like, look how humble I am, right? The ego's in there trying to appear humble to other people. So you would like to be kind and gentle because it's the right thing to do, not because you're trying to project a certain image. Ask others for advice and then learn from their life, right? Without trying to prove anything to them or without trying to teach them anything. If you're sitting in a social situation and somebody starts talking with their ego about what's going on in their life and trying to show off all the things that they're doing, you might notice your ego wants to come over the top of them and say, oh, well, look at all the things I'm doing. You're going to need to restrain your mind, because just because other people are coming out into a conversation with ego, be alert that your ego is going to want to come over the top of them, and don't allow it to do that. Just listen. And even though they're having ego, it's harming them. It's not harming you. So you can just sit there and ask them questions. Oh, really? You've traveled all through Africa and done safaris. Wow, that sounds interesting. Can you tell me more about it? You might decide to do that, right? And you're just listening to this person, and maybe their ego is just all over the place, and that's just what they're doing. Doesn't mean you need to bring your ego out, right? Just leave it under the sofa. Okay. Help others without any expectations of anything in return, with any kind of favor or positive benefit for yourself. Seek guidance from teachers, whether it's about these teachings or anything else that you might be interested in learning. Anytime you're noticing the conceit arising, or it's wanting to project itself with arrogance and pride, or judgment, or measuring and comparing, cut that off and let it go. That's your mindfulness. You're paying attention with your mindfulness. Those 4 foundations of mindfulness, you're going to need to be aware of those mental objects of any time arrogance or pride or judgment or measuring and comparing is coming up. You're going to need to then apply right effort to cut that off. That's why the Eightfold Path is a foundational teaching, that you need to know that first before you start diving into these fetters. And that's why you're putting together your Eightfold Path first. You're starting to experience the jhanas. Now you pivot and you start focusing on these fetters, because you need that Eightfold Path well underway to be able to get rid of any of these fetters. If you didn't understand right mindfulness and right effort, you wouldn't be able to get rid of these fetters. And if you weren't doing right concentration, which is practicing breathing mindfulness meditation, loving kindness meditation, and practicing singleness of mind, you wouldn't be able to see these fetters as they're arising. So that's really important that you have the Eightfold Path well underway so that you can cut off and let go. And then seek guidance with teachers about the ego over multiple sessions. This ego isn't going to leave you very easily or very quickly. There used to be this commercial in America. For those of you guys that have been in America or seen these commercials, it was this mucus commercial of this medicine that you take it and it gets rid of this mucus. And they made this cartoon characters where this family of mucus came and moved into your sinuses, and they set up shop in your sinuses. They set up a sofa, a TV, and all these kinds of things, and they're just so comfortable hanging out. And now you take this medicine and it's supposed to clear out this mucus, and the mucus is like holding on, like, no, we don't want to leave, no. But this medicine comes in and wipes it out, right? This is what the ego does. It's going to hold on for dear life. It's like that bad tenant that doesn't give you any benefit. And every time you convince it to leave, you think it's on its way out, and it finds a way to put its foot in the door and stay there. It's just holding on to dear life. It doesn't want to leave. Your ego is going to try to convince you that you're more enlightened than you actually are, so that it can stick around. If the ego can convince you that you're more enlightened than you really are, it'll stick around for longer and longer periods of time. So what you're going to hear me say in a moment is never convince yourself that the ego's gone. Even when your mind's enlightened and you haven't seen discontentedness for 2 or 3 or 4 years, don't ever convince yourself that the ego's gone. Because as soon as you convince yourself, 3 months in, 6 months in, you've been working on the ego and you convince yourself it's gone, when it rises itself up, you'll miss it. It's kind of like that game whack-a-mole. If you're standing there with the mallet in your hand and you're hitting all the moles as they're popping up, if you think the game's over, you're like, okay, game's over, sweet. But now, it pops its head up again and you missed it, right? So if you convince yourself that the ego's gone, because that's what the ego's going to try to do. It's going to try to convince you that it's gone and that you're more enlightened than you really are, because then it can stick around for longer, right? So you're going to need continuous guidance. You're going to need to continue to be vigilant all through your practice. And anytime you see the slightest little hint of arrogance or pride or boastfulness, you'd like to squash it and get it out of the mind. Okay? So here's how you're going to know that the mind has eliminated its ego, that you'll deeply understand and be able to explain the fetter, taint, pollution of mind described as conceit. You'll understand what the ego is, and you'll understand how to eliminate it because you've actually done that work. You'll know what conceit is. You'll know what the symptoms are. You'll know what the remedy is. You'll have already been able to explain that, and because you've actually done it. You'll no longer experience any discontentedness associated with the ego, right? When other people have ego, your ego is not going to like that. Look at her trying to be so great. Look at him trying to be so great. I don't like that. I don't like it when people try to come to me with their ego. The mind's not going to like that, right? When you have your own ego, right? But when you don't have ego, it'll be like, look at that person's ego. Okay, yeah, I see it. Okay, I still love them. I still care for them. Let me just spend some time with them. Okay, I see what they're doing, but you're not going to judge them for it because you were there before in the past too, and you know what that's like. And unfortunately, this person just hasn't gotten the help they need, and that's okay. Everybody's on their own journey. Okay, so you won't experience any discontentedness because your ego will have been fully eradicated. There won't be any more symptoms of that. You'll notice that the mind will not be judging others and looking down and putting people down below you. And you won't be degrading and diminishing to yourself or to others because you will have eradicated that. That negative self-talk in the mind where you're constantly degrading yourself, that'll be gone by the time your ego is gone. And you won't be doing that to other people too. Because if you're doing that to other people, you're probably doing it to yourself as well. There'll be an open mind with a willingness to learn from others without any superficial criteria that would preclude you from thinking others have something important, some kind of wisdom to share. So sometimes you're like, I don't want to learn from that person. I don't like the way they do this, or I don't like the way they do that. But by the time you get your ego out of the way and you understand how important wisdom is, you'd be willing to learn from just about anybody, right? Like if they have something that's wise and you identify it as being wise, you'd be willing to learn from that person. And you'll sort through this person's ego. As they're coming at you with ego, you'll be able to say, I'm not even going to address that. I just would like to learn this wisdom that they're sharing with me. What's this wisdom that they're sharing? Let me get to that. But if you've got ego, you won't be able to have that open mind. You'll view all beings as equal, and you'll treat all beings as equal, right? When you walk down the street and you see that street sweeper, you'll be able to say, hello, sir, how are you? Or hello, ma'am, how are you doing? Good morning, sawadee krap, right? Or whatever you say to people. Or you see somebody that's a politician or a famous celebrity. Hello, ma'am, how are you? Sawadee krap. You're going to treat people exactly the same way. But when there's ego in there, you'll treat some people one way, you'll treat other people a different way. And this is part of the reason why the mind is uncomfortable and gets exhausted, because in a social situation, you have to first figure out who's above me and who's below me. And now I'm going to treat these people one way and I'm going to treat these people a different way. And now your mind having to constantly switch between that's exhausting. But if you can get to this solid practice of the wise way of doing things with these natural laws of existence, you just treat everybody the same. Whether they're a street sweeper or they're the richest, most wealthy person in the world, you don't want anything from any of these people. You don't have any cravings, desires, attachments. Your only interest is being loving and kind and warm and gentle with all these people. And you just treat everybody equally and everybody the same. And this is part of where your mind is at ease. But as long as you have conceit in your mind can't be at ease, because you got to first figure out who's above you and who's below you. And now you got to treat one group of people one way and another group of people another way. And if you're standing in mixed company, you're having a hard time here. So that's where the mind can be at ease with that. You'll notice that you're polite, kind, friendly, respectful to all beings, and there's no interest to argue or attempt to argue with others. If you're arguing with somebody, this is your ego trying to prove its dominance to other people. The mind will be incapable of arguing with other people. It's just fruitless. You won't have any interest in that whatsoever. First of all, because it's not part of right intention and right speech. But second of all, once the ego's gone, you won't have anything to prove to others. Right? That's what the ego is going to do, is you've got something to prove to others. I got to prove to others that I'm smart. I got to prove to others that I'm wise because I want them to respect me in a certain way. This is the mind's ego that's doing that. But when you get rid of that, you won't have a desire to go around and argue with people and convince them that what you're doing is right. You'll no longer be interested in chasing after societal position, status, or authority. Doesn't mean you don't do those things, right? You could have somebody without ego who's the president of a country, or you could have someone without ego who's rich and famous. Sometimes these things go together where there's ego and these kinds of things in these positions, but it doesn't have to be that way, right? The people who are doing these kinds of things that are in positions of authority without ego, you don't really hear from them much. They're just going out there doing the things that they do. They're not looking for accolades. They're not looking to be on the news. They're not looking for people to admire them for what they're doing. They just know it's a wise thing to do, and they go out into the world and do it. So oftentimes what you see on the news or what you see in publicity is you might see people who have ego. It doesn't mean everybody in the news has ego, but that's oftentimes what you might see because people might be looking for those accolades, where someone who's just humbly going about their day, doing the wise things that they know is wise, they're not looking for that admiration. So you can be in these positions of status or authority without ego. It doesn't mean that you wouldn't do these positions. It just means that you're not chasing after them. Right? If you've got ego in your mind and you want to be acknowledged for a certain position, you'll chase after that position in order to get it so that then other people can acknowledge and admire you for having gotten that. And this is why sometimes we work ourselves into a livelihood that we're ultimately uncomfortable with because we just chase after it based on our conceit. But if you get that conceit out of the way and you select a livelihood that you thoroughly enjoy, then you're making decisions to do this livelihood because it's something you thoroughly enjoy, not because you want other people to admire you in any one particular way or another. And then lastly, there won't be any interest in projecting or communicating one's position, status, authority, wholesome traits, or for others to acknowledge, affirm, or recognize your accomplishments. It doesn't mean you never talk about these things. It just means that you wouldn't talk about them unprompted. Right? If you're going into a conversation and you're talking about yourself without being asked about it, this is the mind wanting to project its ego. Whereas if somebody asked you like, hey, what do you do for a living? You would find a humble way to say that, but you wouldn't be going on and on and on and on and on and on like, look at me and look what I'm doing. So you would still potentially talk about these things, but it's when people ask you about it, right? You really don't need to go out into the world and convince everybody else that you're such a good person and telling them all the things that you're doing, why you're doing it, and how you're doing it. But occasionally, you're going to have people that are interested in what you're doing, and they're going to ask you questions about those things. And then you just find a humble way to be able to reply and answer those things so that your mind doesn't come out with its arrogance and its pride and its boastfulness. But there won't be even an interest to project or communicate one's position. But when people ask you, of course, you're going to need to find humble ways to say those things. And now you reply to whatever it is that they're asking you. Okay, so this is how you'll know that the ego's gone. And then some more here is you'll choose to pursue life goals and objectives based in wise decision making rather than wanting to be perceived by others in a certain way. That's what I was talking about with the job, that you'll pursue things in life based on your interest to do those things, not based in conceit. No interest to be prideful, boastful, or showing off to anyone about anything. There'll be calmness and confidence around all individuals, no matter what their role is in society. Right now, if you're feeling shaken up around people, this is because of the conceit. You know, if you're putting yourself below people or above people, your mind can easily be shaken up in these situations. But eventually you'll get to the point where you just feel at ease around everybody. And it doesn't matter what their position is in society. You notice there'll be calmness and confidence around all people. You can relate and understand people in their roles in society, finding it easy to make friends and relate to others. You can reside harmoniously with all beings. As long as you have ego in your mind, you can't reside harmoniously with all beings, because in some cases you're going to talk down to people, in other cases you'll talk up to people. And then again, people are going to push you aside. But when you find that that's not the case anymore, that you can understand that this person has a certain role in society and you can respect that role, then okay, you can do this without conceit. Sometimes people think that having respect for somebody means that you have to put yourself below that person. That's not what respect is. Respect is that you just acknowledge and you respect the person for being a person. You don't have to put yourself below someone in order to respect them. So if that's what you're doing now, where you're putting yourself below someone in order to respect them, you would like to get rid of that, where you just acknowledge that, oh, okay, this person's the leader of the village. Okay, if I need something, I'll go talk to this person. They're not above me. They're not below me. They're just performing a certain role in society. Oh, this person's a famous celebrity. They're an actor or they're a sports star. Okay, great. That's what they choose to do in the world, and I can talk to this person just like they're an average human being, just like everyone else. And this is what you would like to be able to get to, so that you can understand people's roles in society and you can relate to others and make friends with others without you putting yourself above or below them. Okay? And this is some words of the Buddha where he's teaching you how detrimental that this ego is, this conceit is. I usually read this in other classes, so I'll just read this to you guys. He talks here, he says, gain, honor, and praise are an obstacle, even for an arahant. And then now, here's the actual words from the Buddha. This was the title. Monks, gain, honor, and praise, I say, are an obstacle, even for a monk who was an arahant, one with taints destroyed. When this was said, the Venerable Ananda asked the master teacher Gotama, why, Venerable Sir, are gain, honor, and praise an obstacle, even for a monk with taints destroyed? So I'm going to pause here, right? The Buddha says that it's an obstacle for enlightened beings. That's what an arahant is. He's saying gain, honor, and praise are an obstacle for an arahant, one who has eliminated their pollutions of mind. And his student Ananda's like, hold on a second. If someone's enlightened, why is conceit an obstacle to them? Why is it hard for them? So the Buddha says, I do not say, Ananda, the gain, honor, and praise are an obstacle to his unshakable liberation of mind. So the Buddha is saying it's not an obstacle for his enlightened mind because his mind's already liberated. But I say they are an obstacle to his attainment of those peaceful dwellings in this very life, which are achieved by one who resides diligent, dedicated, and determined. So he's saying it's an obstacle to your enlightenment. Once you're enlightened, conceit is no longer an obstacle because you've already eliminated it. But it's an obstacle to your enlightenment. That's what the Buddha is saying. He's saying, so dreadful, Ananda, are gain, honor, and praise, so bitter, vile, obstructive to achieving the unsurpassed security from bondage or enlightenment. Therefore, Ananda, you should train yourselves thus. We will abandon the arisen gain, honor, and praise, and we will not let the arisen gain, honor, and praise persist, obsessing our mind. Thus should you train yourself. So when somebody's giving you praise or honor or respect, you would like your mind to be unaffected by that. So if someone says, wow, you're so pretty, you're so beautiful, right? You're not interested in getting those conditioned pleasant feelings. You might say thank you. You might say thank you for your kind words. I appreciate what you say. Or maybe someone's admiring, you're so kind, or you're so gentle, or you speak so friendly, or whatever they might say. The more enlightened you become, the more you're going to be functioning as a wholesome and wise individual, the more people are going to take note of that. They're not going to know what enlightenment is necessarily. They're not going to know the natural laws, but as you're functioning through these natural laws, people are going to notice that, and they're going to start complimenting you, and you're going to need to remain humble. So the more enlightened you become, the more compliments you're going to get, and you're going to need to train your mind to not allow that gain, honor, and praise to obsess your mind. You might say thank you for your kind words, but don't allow the mind to get conditioned pleasant feelings. Because then when someone says you're the rudest person I've ever met, you're going to feel painful feelings because of that. Okay, so that's what the Buddha is essentially teaching you here. And then lastly, as I was mentioning, always and forever, develop your practice to eliminate ego. Wherever you see it, root it out. It's the most dirty thing. It's sabotaging your ability to get to enlightenment. It's an obstacle for you. You're going to need to root it out of the mind. Don't ever assume that the ego has been extinguished. Just always be game on with the mallet in your hand, ready for when the mole pops up, and knock it back down. And don't allow that ego to rise up. Okay, so any questions on this fetter of conceit? Yes, sir.
I just thought a bit about if someone wants to teach me wisdom. Now is a question, if it's really wisdom which could help me, yeah, it's good to understand and learn from that. But if it's like completely the opposite, what you're learning and so on, how to deal with that, I mean, I would listen. But for example, if someone would teach me that, I think my mind would wander and I wouldn't really try to understand or something, because I think it's so different. Or
are you talking about like unsolicited guidance?
Yeah.
If someone's giving you unsolicited guidance, it's unwise to listen to that, because that's their ego. And now the more that you feed that, you're just going to be getting that over and over and over and over again from this person. So typically what I would do is just change the subject. Now, if it's a student who's doing that, I will usually try to point out to them, and because my role in this relationship is to help them see where their fetters are and show them the treasure to pick up. But let's just say I was outside and it was like a friend, because sometimes I go to sporting events with my son and there's other parents there, and they might come over and they start trying to teach me all kinds of things. I'll usually just kind of politely walk away, or be like, oh, I need to go get a drink, or I need to go to the bathroom, or I might just change the subject to something else, because otherwise you're just going to keep getting this unsolicited guidance. And I'm not putting my expectations on them. I'm not telling them like, you shouldn't be giving me unsolicited guidance. That's unwise, right? This is putting your expectations on them. Instead, you just make choices and decisions to take the conversation in a different direction. And then sometimes they keep coming back to that. And then eventually I might just end up walking away from the conversation.
Okay, yeah, good to hear. Because I had one conversation where this person told me about these things, and I think normally I listen and say, okay. But yeah, and I think if I would say, okay, yeah, then I would feed his, like he thinks, oh yeah, it's so true what I'm saying.
Yeah.
You're right. So that's not so good.
Yeah, if you're just sitting there listening like, yeah, okay, I understand what you're saying. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. You're encouraging this unsolicited guidance. And if you say to them, you shouldn't be giving me unsolicited guidance, well, that's unsolicited guidance that you just gave them, right? So that's why you would like to just make a decision to either change the conversation or walk away from the conversation. And this is that person's ego, where now people don't want to be around them, right? And that's what they're learning. They're like, whoa, every time I give people unsolicited guidance, they walk away from me. Whereas if you sit there and feed that, they never get that feedback. They never see the natural law of karma. And this is where someone can have craving and clinging in a relationship, and they feel like if I walk away, I'm being rude. But that's not actually being rude, walking away. This is just impermanence. And the person gets mad that you walked away, then this is their own craving, desire, attachment. And typically you're not just going to, like give them the, stink nose and walk away. You're going to be like, oh, you know what? I need to go to the bathroom. We'll talk another time. And you just kind of like walk away, because people aren't going to be like, no, don't go to the bathroom. I got to teach you this thing. Usually that's like an easy way to get out of the conversation. And maybe you going to the bathroom is just, you got to go wash your hands, right? Because you're not interested in lying. Right? You're not interested in doing that either. So going to the bathroom is like a great way to get out of just about any conversation. And at the same time, it's helping this person see, hey, every time you come at me with unsolicited guidance, I'm not here. I'm not that person. And you're not putting your expectations on them. You're not controlling them. You're not wanting them to be a certain way. You're just making a decision to move away from this unsolicited guidance, because otherwise it's just going to come at you like a waterfall.
Unsolicited, what exactly means that? Like,
I'm sorry?
Unsolicited?
Unsolicited means without your interest and without you asking, right? So if somebody just walks up to you and be like, Leo, a green shirt really isn't so wise to wear on Thursday. Like, you wearing green shirt on Thursday, this is really going to mess up your appearance that you've got here. Like, why should you wear a green shirt? You shouldn't do that. This is like me trying to teach you something and you haven't even asked me about it. Where if you said to me, you said, David, what color shirt would you think I should wear on Thursday? Now you're soliciting my guidance. You're asking for something.
So what if we just have a discussion about spirituality, about Buddhism, then it's not unsolicited, but still, right? He maybe talks about whatever.
In that situation, you guys are having an open conversation, and you're choosing to have a conversation about spirituality, right? And that's your choice to have that conversation and open up to that conversation. But still, like, telling somebody what they should or shouldn't do is really unwise in any situation.
What I realized when he told me talked about this, and I said, and what I heard from my teacher, he talks about enlightenment like this and this.
Mm-hmm.
Is it a way to do it? That's how I did it. I think it was okay, but maybe he has a different view on this topic, so he might be like, I don't agree with what you're saying.
So let's say you sit down at lunch and this other person just starts talking about enlightenment and what they think enlightenment is. If I was you, I wouldn't just start talking to that person what you know enlightenment to be. I would say, are you interested in understanding my perspective on this? Because you're not interested in wasting your time and talking to someone who's not truly interested in what it is you have to say. So if they're coming at you with, this is what enlightenment is, and they're having this conversation, it would be wise for you to check to see if they're interested in what it is that you have to say before you start sharing. Because why would you share with somebody who their mind is closed off? And then sometimes they might say, yes, I am interested in what you have to say. You might start talking for the first 10, 15, 20, 30 seconds, and then all of a sudden their ego rises up. And that's where you just be quiet. You just don't even say anything beyond that, because you can't talk through an ego. If somebody has an ego, this is why, like, if a student has ego, I don't even try to teach them, because it's unwise, it's unfruitful, it's just a waste of time.
So redirect the mind, maybe go to the toilet, stuff like that.
Yeah, where there's ego coming up, not interested whatsoever in that conversation. And it's not because I'm discontent, it's not because I'm angry or frustrated, it's not because I'm wanting this conversation to be any particular way, but there's just no benefit in somebody's ego trying to come over the top and, be arrogant and prideful, and you're not interested in feeding that. So it's better to just walk away from the conversation.
Okay. And then another question. I thought about if I would ask my mom to wash her feet, for example. It might be awkward for her too, or like, because she don't know, never heard about that. How to deal in this situation, Yeah, it probably will be. When I did this for my mom and my grandmother, they felt pretty awkward. And that awkwardness is because of their own cravings, their own desires. And you might even feel awkward. Like when I did this for my mom, I was kind of shaking initially when I did this, because that's the ego trying to hold on. And the mind feels uncomfortable when I was getting down on the floor, because I had all this resentment and hostility from my mom all through my life for the things that had happened. And I was starting to become more loving and kind. And one of the things that I ended up doing was choosing to wash her feet, and my ego was holding on. So when you're experiencing that awkwardness, you're headed in the right direction, because you're trying to clear that out. Because by doing these activities, you will ultimately get to the point where the mind is comfortable and content. When you feel that awkwardness, the way that the mind typically relates to this, and when it's unwise and unenlightened, is it'll push this away. It'll be like, oh, no, I don't want to do that. But that's exactly the reason why you need to do it, because the mind does feel awkward. It's holding on. This ego is holding on. And now when you put your mind in this position where you're washing your mom's feet, you feel awkward in that situation. And that's the ego. And that's what you're working to get rid of. So as you do that, that's actually going to help you. So if your mom is feeling awkward, you just say, okay, Mom, well, should we do it now? Or would you like to wait a little bit and we'll do it tomorrow? You can give her these options. And maybe she ultimately says, I don't ever want to do it. Okay, that's her choice. So you find somebody else that you can do it with, because you're not interested in forcing her to do this activity. But if her mind's choosing to do it, then you can choose to do it. You can even present it to her in a certain way using your right speech. You can say, Mom, there's something I learned while I was in Thailand, and I would like to do this for you. Would you be okay if I did something special for you? I would like to give it a try. She's like, what are you talking about, son? And you're like, oh, I would like to wash your feet.
Oh, that's really strange. I've never had anyone wash my feet before. Yeah, I'm sure. I've never done it for you before, but I would like to give it a try. Are you okay with that? And you kind of let her decide, right? You're not forcing it upon her. You're not trying to convince her to do it. You're just proposing it and then allowing her mind to get comfortable with it.
And how often doing this? Like maybe I did it first time, and maybe do it 1 week later again with her feet.
What do you think my answer is going to be?
I have to choose. Oh, no, I don't know.
Yeah, up to you.
Up to me.
Yeah. The times when people typically do it is like New Year's, Mother's Day, your birthday, things like that, because you're thanking your mom. Because when you wash their feet, you kind of sit down on the ground, you say some nice kind words like, thank you, Mom, for giving me life. I apologize for anything harmful that I've done to you over the course of my life. You've been a great mother for me, and I appreciate everything that you've done for me for this point forward in my life. And then you just kind of wash your feet. And usually you give them a little bit of flowers and stuff like that, or some little gift like fruit or chocolate or something like that.
Okay. On the 6th September is my birthday. I come back to my mom at this day, so I could do it.
Yeah, if you like.
Yeah. I wanted to say something, but I forgot it, I think.
Okay.
And yeah, if it's the ego if it's uncomfortable, I put myself in the situation, right? It's uncomfortable, but then right effort, cut it off, right?
Exactly.
So
each time you do it, it'll
not just
get more.
Put yourself in the situation, but also action.
Yeah, you're putting the mind in that situation. And each time you do it, you're going to get more and more comfortable with it. I've done it for my wife's parents multiple times. I've even done it for my wife. I've done it for my mom, my grandmother, people like this. I've done it for people who were teaching me things about other things. I've done it for teachers and people like this. You can do it for different people. And if you feel like you'd be highly awkward to do it to with your mom, maybe you try someone else that you wouldn't feel as awkward, because you're not interested in just ramming your mind into these situations. So you can do it incrementally in situations where you feel less awkward. Or maybe with your mom, you feel like you would feel less awkward, and maybe you start with your mom. So you can do it that way too, where you incrementally work towards an individual that you feel like you would be the most awkward to do it with this person. You can do it with people that you'd feel less awkward to do it with first. And that's a way for your mind to gradually get comfortable with it.
And you cut it off by the sensation, like this, like this.
Yeah, but you might not be able to, right? Because if it's really strong, if it's a really strong craving, you're not going to be able to just cut it off and let it go.
You try it, like in your
mind, you just push your way through it. You just move your way through it and just do the actions and do what you are planning to do. And then you'll see that when you're done, your mind will calm down and settle. And then each time you do it, it'll get easier and easier. You're welcome. Okay. So, yeah, you have a question, Helena?
Do you please go back to the previous slide?
Sure. This one?
Yeah, thank you. So is the Buddha saying here that praise is an obstacle for beings in the third stage of enlightenment or on the verge of entering arahantship?
Yeah, he's saying until you get to enlightenment, it is an obstacle. But once you're enlightened, it's no longer an obstacle because it's been eliminated.
Thank you.
Okay, so it's 12:30, which means it's time for our break, our excursion. Today we had planned to go to Hua Tung Tao. If you guys would like to go there, we have a van that's available. If not, that's fine too. You guys, know everything in life's optional. It's up to you. This Hua Tung Tao, it's a big reservoir. It's a nature area with bamboo places around, and you can go there and eat food and things like that. If you guys would like to go, let me know how many people are interested in going. Okay, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, 5. Okay, so maybe we'll just talk afterwards and we'll decide if you guys would like to use the van or you'd like to go there in some other way. Okay, we're going to restart this evening at 6:30. I'm going to do loving kindness meditation as a start so that you guys can get a practice of that since you just learned it this morning. And then I'm going to teach you about the fetter of restlessness. Okay, this is the 9th fetter, and teaching you what it is, the symptoms of it, how to eliminate it, and how to know that you've actually eliminated it. Okay, so if I see you guys at 6:30, wonderful, and if not, have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll see you next time. Okay, sawadee krap, sawadee krap.